All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Today we're going to talk about ego. It's bound to be very esoteric, so brace yourself. So I'm making tons of these shows, right? And starting to get some followers now and getting a lot of really good comments, and everything's going really, really well. I'm trying to increase the output to sort of keep up with demand, I would say. And I don't know what anybody's demand really is, but I thought it'd be really good to check my own ego in the middle of this process, right? Because it's very easy to be labeled a narcissist anytime that you, I don't know, I think it's when you create a loop back in on yourself on one level with narcissism, right? The narcissistic fairy tale is that the guy looked into the water and fell in love with his own image, right? Well, YouTube is sort of my reflective pool if I'm not careful, right? So I want to go through some of the anatomy of a egotistical frame of mind to just better understand the concept in general, because people, if somebody said, man, that guy's a really big ego, you're really not quite sure. You think you know, and there's some people who will definitely overtly tell you that they're the best at this and the best at that, and clearly they're perhaps average or they're good, or they're throwing their accomplishments at people's faces, that kind of stuff. You know that you're dealing with something overconfidence. You're dealing with ego. There's two types of ego in the world. If we go with Sigmund Freud's ego was a much higher level concept, which is, I would classify it and paraphrase it in my own way, which was, it's the gyroscope of sanity. The kind that Freud talks about, the one that's super duper deep inside of us, which is that we do wake up in pure and I just say pure, a pure lack of understanding of what we are. We just do. We have these ideas of how everything's put together. But for any of you who've seriously contemplated flat Earth and looked at the flight paths on planet Earth and looked at the fact that the stars spin around Polaris and there's no wobble, the fact that NASA can't produce a picture of Earth that isn't a composite in a computer or a composite and through some front projection technique, hey, you were so sure we were on a heliocentric ball, weren't you? And our ego still hangs on to that. Because we need to know. We need to know where we are. We need to know who we are. Some people run off for religion, and they've got the whole universe mapped out, right? With no evidence of any kind. Man, they know where we came from, where we're going. They know weird esoteric things like we're going to be buried and then resurrected at some future point. What's interesting, for the last 2,000 years, a lot of churches, they said that the Christ would come back in 2,000 years. That was one of the things that they said would happen. And it's been 2,016 years, and ain't nothing coming back so far. But ego is, in the modern day time, we all know what it is, right? Someone who's sort of gloating what they can do, or they're just, again, they're like narcissistically in love with themselves, right? And I think that, when I did this episode on loving yourself, which I haven't released yet as of this recording, but I'll have to get it out first because it talks about a lot of this concept. I'll have to put this one out a few shows after that. I discuss the difference between confidence and ego. Confidence is the good stuff. Loving yourself is a good thing. There's a fine line where you can cross the line. And when you cross that line, you cease to be a use to those around you. You do not empathetically live for anyone else but yourself. And sometimes you need to do that, right? Sometimes you need to, if your life's not in order, you need to go after it. But, the ego that I think we're all concerned about is a person who is blessed to have an opportunity. And it's sort of that they throw the opportunity in other people's faces as they exist. And again, I think that I think that ego is sort of a label on a need of humanity, of a particular human, right? A particular human needs the feedback loop because they're not able to get it themselves through looking in the mirror, talking to themselves. They don't hang out with loved ones that give them a really good impression of themselves. And so it's sort of like they need it from the world. And what I always find when I deal with the tumultuous nature of lead singers and bands, and you see it in actors every once in a while, and anyone who's just narcissistically needing to be famous, the problem is that once it crosses that particular line, because there's all forms of ego, right? Once it crosses that Sally Fields line, and you don't get the Oscar to close it off, hopefully, right? Hopefully she had an epiphany of sanity when she grabbed the Oscar and said, you love me, you really love me, sort of thing. That was conclusive for her. That was closure for her. But most of us don't get big gold statues. And so if you develop a psychological need to be approved, to feed that ego, and you get it and you feel amazing, and then you're trying to live a life of winning the lottery, essentially, right? It's tough, I have made a ton of these things, right? Our normal show is at 101. We had 20 roughly real or bullshits, which is a whole different show. And I've done, I think unpublished or published and unpublished. I think I've probably almost done 70 of these because I've lost at least another 10. I've done a lot more than that. I am completely and utterly tired of my own voice. I considered not smoking cigars during the show so I wouldn't have to edit them. So I just cut off the front, cut off the back, put the intro in, the outro, and then just be done with it. And then just try to keep track of where I might have made a mistake. But I am not... I like the fact that people are interested in this stuff, and I like the fact that I think what I'm seeing is more of a, again, I'm pushing and prodding concepts in you guys, and hopefully getting you to have conversations in your own personal circles. That's my true goal for this, is to create sort of a virus of consciousness, if anything. And again, you don't have to agree with anything that I say whatsoever. And a lot of people are suggesting that I read things and watch things, and sometimes I do a crappy show. And my concern when I make a show is whether or not you're satisfied with it, and not for a reward to me, just to make sure that you don't feel like you've tuned into something that's eroding. One of the coolest things I ever heard about Lenny Kravitz, or heard from Lenny Kravitz way back in the day, and some of you might have seen this, okay? Lenny Kravitz went on the Pee Wee Herman show. Right before it closed, right before Pee Wee Herman's show was over, Lenny Kravitz went on there, and he had just put out his first album. And he was talking to Pee Wee, and of course Pee Wee's acting totally crazy, and Lenny's acting as cool as hell, because that's just how he rolls, right? But he made a promise. He said, when I stop making good music, I'm going to stop making music. I'll go do something else with my life. And I think overall, he's been pretty damn good with that promise. And so he went from cutting albums to cutting singles to writing other people's music, which I actually thought was pretty cool. He did, Madonna's song, the HB helicopter chasing Al Qaeda. Anyway, he did a song for Madonna that was really cool. I can't remember the name of it right now, but he pulled back, and now he does singles most of the time, which is kind of cool. So again, I'd rather have the show go black for a few weeks than, or dead, for a few weeks, instead of making a crappy show. And I've got at least one show that I've just watched it and it's just not right. And so, and the sad thing was I got it right in my cigar channel, which is a full review of Rollerball, which I think is a very important movie for everyone to see. If you want to see that video, you could probably search on YouTube for just type in cigar review Rollerball, and you'll probably find my video on that. It's a very similar cover graphic as the one for the YouTube show. But let's get into ego, because I've dealt with ego, and there was actually an episode a really long time ago. I did one of these riffs where I said, and I'll tell you a story, and I never did. And it has to do with ego on a level that was crazy. Now, what I think is interesting about ego is that it's regionally different. What do I mean by that? I think that if you live in a different part of the world, the type of ego that you run into seems to be grouped in species. My hometown doesn't have a lot of ego. There's not a lot to have an ego about. The biggest people in my hometown that had egos were people that had a sort of the inn at the top of the, I guess you could say, executive management of law and order in the town, because they had the arrogance of being untouchable. I said one of the episodes where a guy lived next to my grandmother, chases his girlfriend out of the house and shoots a gun at her. And the bullet went in the front yard of my grandma's yard, and the cops dug it out, and this guy gets off scot-free. Attempted murder. It's his mistress. This guy's married. And he's trying to kill his mistress. And he gets off because he owns one of the biggest oil companies in the entire town. But most everyone in the Midwest, they're taught not to be egotistical, and they usually don't have enough resources to gain such an ego. So the only egos that tend to spring up from time to time are just as kids grow up. A guy, maybe he can get slightly more women than somebody else, but usually they settle down in the Midwest. They're not actually out to create a black book of women. And that kind of reputation travels a lot faster in the Midwest and doesn't get you anywhere with the women. Because as soon as you get that reputation, you got to leave. So it doesn't happen very often. So I wasn't raised in an environment where anyone around me had an ego. But probably one of the best lessons I learned about ego, true unadulterated ego, was working in the video game business for the better part of, 10 years before my own company, right? I did 10 outside and 10 inside, plus a lot of side projects. And that's not counting my teenage years, where I made them at home and made them at school. But when I went to Electronic Arts for the very first time, I was just a guest. And the guy I had gotten into the business had gotten a job there, and he eventually got me in. But the cool thing about EA was I came in this organization, and you have a bunch of kids working for the biggest game company on planet Earth at the time. Yeah, this went on for at least 10 years. I worked for them was in and out of the hallways and working for them. I contracted at first for quite some time, and then I finally got full-time in 99. But I was always in and out, always contributing. And so what I realized about the place that I loved the most, other than making great games, was that these people were extremely talented everywhere I went, and no one had an ego. Not the guy who ran the place, Larry Probst. John Rigatella, who replaced him, never had an ego. Just everyone was actually pretty cool. And then there was a couple folks that came in with egos or developed them afterwards. Right? I remember one of the humble lower-end marketing people actually became a gigantic marketing person, and man, did that guy get an ego. Holy shit. He's no longer with the company anymore. But man, I remember when he was nobody. And he just ascended up, and he got to the point where he wouldn't talk to me. It was really strange. I was responsible for one of his first mega successes, making his department make millions of dollars, where he was able to take that, look at what we did, and show it to his boss and get a promotion. And then it was just like, forget about you existing sort of thing. Really weird. But there was a couple people out of probably, I think, before we built EA.com, it was 1,500 people, I think. And it was just a couple people in the entire company that had egos. But you could go up to floors. There's 2 giant buildings in Redwood Shores by the time I left. And one of them was really a creative tower, which was a little taller than the executive tower by a couple floors. And you go to the top of the 8th floor of the creative tower. And I think it was 207 and 209, I think. And you just were swimming in the most creative, brilliant minds ever. Designers, pretty much maybe 60% male, 40% female. And it was just a beautiful place. Everybody was always looking to help people out. And then when the .com era came in, you have all these backstabbing, weird dog-eat-dog people from the internet industry, which are largely 80% hacks, right? And they move into the company because we had to hire people very, very quickly. And I was very fortunate in my department not to have any of this weirdness. But we had a lot of weird folks walking around the hallways that were just dripping in ego. Unbelievable. And they really didn't have much of a resume before they came. They really didn't knock anything out of the park while they were there. In fact, one of the guys we just shoveled money into never created anything. And just really strange, right? It was the first time I'd ever seen ego in the company. And a lot of us old-timers were looking around going, man, this culture has really changed. I don't know if I really like this anymore, you know? And eventually, everybody got clipped, especially in .com, right? But they started laying off like crazy, and now they're number 2 instead of number 1. But when I saw this, you know, one of the guys was a big game designer. He came in from the outside from a different company. And it wasn't that he, I think we thought he had an ego, but I'm not sure he actually did. But it made us all check ourselves and made us appreciate the fact that we've been able to exist nearly 10 years without any major egos running around the hallways, which was kind of nice, you know. But what I find with people who exude an ego is that it's sort of a frail cover story. They don't really have the ego that they're putting out. They're pretending because they're very insecure, right? What I find is that the more omnipotent your mind is, the more aware your mind is and obtusely tuned into the universe, you have a choice. Whether or not you actually do live for self or live for others. You can make a hell of a lot more money living for self, I will say that much. I think you'll find that you're extremely isolated when you do. And I think that what we have to be careful about is how we would ever achieve any sort of approval in the world. The lead singer disease, for those of you who don't hang out with rock bands, there is a weird thing we call the lead singer disease, right? LSD. And not to be confused with the wonderful drug called mescaline. But what happens is a lead singer will typically, I'll just pick on male lead singers, right? They typically will be a handsome person, and they will be young and fit, and their voice is very unique, which is why they got the job in the first place. And then time passes. They get their 10 years of fame if they're lucky, if they're super successful. And then it comes back around for the second decade, and the industry is moving on. It's just the way it works these days, right? The bands usually split up at some point because the lead singers get egotistical in the eyes of the people. Sometimes they want to go off and do their own solo album. Sometimes they just fall apart. There's plenty of bands. I'm going to give you an example here. But what happens is the lead singers don't think they can do it anymore. This is what's really going on. But they have an ego, which is that thing that feeds them. An ego is sort of a machine that's outside of you that gathers up, approval and feeds it to you to keep you sustained and to keep you thinking that you have a value in the world. Because for some reason, there's nothing outside the machine that would give that person value. There's nothing inside the person that gives them value to themselves, right? I personally feel very confident just in who I am as a person, If I ever caught myself being narcissistic, I would really check myself. But so far, so good, I'm so tired of my own voice. I'm so tired of seeing my own face. The reason why I got so many videos in the queue is I just don't want to look at myself to edit these things, right? I don't have to hear myself say the same thing twice, It's just, I'm done, So that's why they kind of ebb out the way they do, right? But with lead singers, they don't want to get on stage and fail because they feel like they failed the fans. They feel like they failed themselves. They feel like they failed their band. And they feel like that will be the epitaph. The last thing written on their tombstone was a good singer, died a bad singer. And of course, metabolism slow down. People gain weight. The more successful you are, the more you feel like, you imagine growing up in your 20s. This is what I've discovered. You grow up in your 20s and you're a mega famous musician. Mega famous anything is going to have probably the same effect, but you can be with whatever sex you're attracted to as much as you want. There's plenty of money going around, and it just seems like, the checks always arrive. That's the weird thing, is your mailbox is always full of a check. And you wake up for 10 years and it's just, there's the check. You make music, you perform, there's the check. And then almost as sudden as stardom happened, the checks slow down. Sometimes the checks completely disappear for people. And imagine all those years, that whole decade of your maybe late teens and all the way through your 20s, heading to your 30s, where you're supposed to develop mentally to build sort of a framework for dealing with life surprises in various things. You are in no need of such a thing because you have this constant reinforcement from society, from the business side of things, right? When you need to be mature and when you need to manage your life, you may or may not have any faculties to do so. So now you end up in your 30s, sort of an overgrown man-child. But you have this incredible talent. And, I could pick on all kinds of different band members who cause problems, but band members get sick. With lead singers, they know they have a very privileged thing because you can play a drum kit sound a particular way, and someone could come in and substitute for you, and as long as they study your technique and play like you, it's like you never were there. Same thing with all the guitars. Same thing with all the basses. Now we know guitar players, bass players, and drummers that you can't just easily replace without someone really studying it really hard, right? John Bonham could not be just easily replaced, right? Jimmy Page at the time would be very tough to replace. Plus, you need to write new music. He can't just stand up there and perform constantly, right? But a lead singer has something very, very amazing, and that is that one of the most incredible instruments on planet Earth is the human voice. It is so unique, right? Robert Plant sounds like no other human on Earth. Steve Perry sounds like no one else. He's the lead singer for Journey. Stephen Pearcy, lead singer for Rat. Doesn't sound like anyone else in the entire industry. Who's going to sound like Mick Jagger? Steven Tyler. Think about it. These individuals can't be replaced. Otherwise, things feel and sound differently. Now, we can't get close approximations, right? I saw Foreigner, and the only original band member was the guitar player. And Foreigner, I forget the gentleman's name, is now singing for them here in 2015, 2016, but he is amazing. I didn't feel like I was not seeing Foreigner. It sounded amazing. Rat's now replaced Stephen Pearcy with a really good singer, and I forget his name too. It's a brand new band. But it's really, really tough, right? Journey has the kid from Thailand, right? Or no, Philippines. Pardon me. Sorry. Led Zeppelin's no more. When you realize you have that leverage, it's tough when you're a teenager and people whisper in your ear, "You're everything, man. You're everything. Without you, there's nothing." The humble nature of potentially not being number one never actually occurs because you grow up being number one, being that person. And so it's a tough addiction to knock, right? What I find weird in America today, and I don't know if this is the case in Europe, but it would seem that for the average human being, you tend to make the most money you're ever going to make per capita of work invested in your late 20s, early 30s. Pretty much around 30, people make the most money they're ever going to make in their life, unless you go off and get more tenacious with life, right? Or you get fortunate in a company that doesn't let you go. But the amount of people I know in mixed industries, man, from like special effects to, I would say from programming to all things creative, even management from time to time, you will simply make the most money in your life in that era. And it's tougher for these individuals to come out. They almost live a rock star life where in their 20s, they're just killing it. They fall uphill. And they get in their 30s and 40s, and then we get to this thing where you realize that corporations don't actually care about you. Big surprise, right? Now, the upshot of that is that self-employment's become a big deal. Self-employment's the way that you actually can have some job security, even though it's tough as hell. You're working all the time, right? But you won't fire you. And if you can build up a skill set that lasts over time, or invest in one that lasts over time, you're good. But this is about ego. I've just kind of lamented around this subject. But I'll give an example of a guy we all worked with. Actually, I managed to slip around this guy. It's interesting. But we had a guy who worked at Electronic Arts who got hired, completely devoid of any experience whatsoever and any really qualifications to do his job. Now, there was a time in the 90s where people in the video game business wanted to know people in the Hollywood business. And the people in the Hollywood business wanted to know people in the video game business. And so as these big white-collar guys who never played any video games, never really contributed to the construction of a film, would get together, every once in a while, one would go work for the other. And so you would get these weird, I guess you could call them nepotistic, but they weren't related, but it was just sort of like this kind of cronyism, I guess is the best way to talk about it. And you would get a transplant. And there's nothing against someone transplanting from one career to another if they can understand what they're doing, but we got a doozy at Electronic Arts. And this guy who, he had a wife that was famous actress, or at least for a very short period of time. She got on a name brand show it was the hottest show on television, and she did about 6 or 7 episodes as the wife of a very famous actor. The show was named after his fictional character from a different series. Maybe you can piece those together. But this guy would sit in his cube, again, with no experience in making video games whatsoever, and he came with a steaming pile of ego that was really unprecedented. Probably the most severe case of ego I've ever heard in my life, personally. But he came in and he would, the story goes, he has a bunch of different facets of his story, but he came into this group that was the highest grossing group at Electronic Arts, at least the Northern California, because our Canadian group had really taken a lot of the games away, but we still had a lot of money coming out of the games in Redwood Shores, San Mateo. But he comes in and he gets a cube to himself, and he immediately starts complaining that he doesn't have an office, which is funny because the guy who hired him had a cube as well. Tiny little, 10 by 10 cube. And we tricked these things out to look pretty cool. But this guy would take phone calls. And he called his buddies in Hollywood. He's not in Hollywood, his wife was, right? But he's hobnobbing with folks. That's all he ever did was hobnob, right? And he would tell his friends loudly on the phone how he is working he's got this shitty job at Electronic Arts. Right. First days. And how he's working with a department full of kids who are idiots, who don't know anything about what they're doing. And how he's going to save the day. Guy's never made a video game in his life. And again, it's like making a movie, right? It's 18 months at the quickest cycle to make a video game, and we were averaging 2 to 3 years at the time. And this particular department was inventing franchises that have gone on to this day to be the franchises. Every single racing game you ever see at EA was started in this department. Every single fighting game you've ever seen at EA started in this department. And they also started basically most of the sports games that are now, the ones that you know so well. So he sat there and berated his employees constantly. Sat in his seat, super duper slouched every meeting. Always huffed and puffed and just sighed at meetings as if he knew anything about a pipeline to make a video game. He had never worked in the film business before, never worked in television before. He came in as the husband of someone who got an acting job. Well, everyone got to the point they couldn't stand the guy. And they moved him from the Bay Area down to L.A. And started working with an outside team to make some more games. Again, he joins a team that's completely buttoned up, completely making this game without any of his help. He never contributes a single feature, never really shakes a hand to cause any change in the world, never really has an idea to how to manage a particular game. Oh, you guys are wasting time here, you need to do this here. Nobody really knew what the guy did. But every single time he'd have a meeting about the team that he was a part of, he would conduct the entire meeting with the possessive phrase, I. I did this, I did that, I did this. When I thought of this, when I thought of that. Now he's in a room with 15 to 25 people when he's just doing a presentation to his own sort of heads of state with his people present. His people did all the work. He just was there as a ceremonial capstone to the pyramid. But he never contributed, ever. No one can. He worked there for God damn. I think he got a chance to work there for nearly 5 years, and at the end of his 5-year term, people asked themselves, well, did he do anything in your department? Because he didn't do anything in our department. How'd he get this paycheck? Of course, this guy's gifted with a check that's probably $130,000 to $160,000 a year for doing nothing. But there's a funny little moment at the end here. I have a friend who, obviously I have lots of friends who worked at EA, but I'll put it this way. The nicest human being I know that ever worked at Electronic Arts. Caught him in an elevator here in LA, and they were going up, and he just completed a meeting, watching this guy say, I. My buddy would never use I in a public situation. You'd have to give him a loan, and he'd only be talking about what he actually did. If there was anything at fault, my buddy would take the blame and then protect his people, right? But he stopped the elevator on this guy. I heard this story about 10 years after, and I just laughed my head off, but he stopped the elevator with this guy. And he turned to the dude, and he said, I just need you to know that I think you're an asshole. And he said, I happen to know you don't do anything here at all. And I've watched you do nothing since I met you. And every single meeting that you have, like the one we just had, where we just had to watch you, you never said my team, we, you said I throughout the whole thing as if you did anything in this project. Just know everyone's up to your, or hip to your game. Nobody thinks you do anything around here. I don't know how you got this job, but I don't think you should stay. And then he hit the elevator. He literally hit the panic button on the elevator to stop it, to have this conversation with this guy. And my buddy doesn't call anyone a name no matter what. And the fact that he called this guy an asshole, it was like Archangel Peter coming down to, or Michael coming down to give this guy a little bit of de-egoing, right? Of course, his retort, I guess, was, well, fuck you, blah, 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 right? Within, I believe, 3 months of that conversation in the elevator, that guy lost his job, finally. So when I think about having an ego, I think about these useless humans that do that kind of stuff, up to the folks that really do have a tremendous amount of talents, and they just do it out of insecurity, right? So the reason why I went through these two different examples with the lead singers and then these jerk executives is that you have a lead singer who's actually participating, and they simply want to believe that they should be on stage. I mean, imagine you're going on stage and there's 20,000 people out there. How do you have the confidence to do that? To not let anybody down. You're going to sing, I don't know, maybe 24 songs. If you have a really long play set, you got to have some confidence, and it may not all be real. You may have to BS yourself on a particular day if you got a cold or something, right? And what I find is that there's an ebb and a flow with ego, in that if you really crawl into a situation where you go, for some reason the people like my voice. It's just my voice. I'm just singing and it's just my voice. But all these people, 20,000 people, have decided they like my voice, as well as the band behind me, so much that they're willing to pay money, drive across town, fight in a parking lot, get inside, spend all the money on everything. They want to buy t-shirts with my face on it. You're going to buy my music. And at the second you lose your ego / your confidence in that situation, you kind of lose the fabric that gives you the ability to walk on stage. I think one of the reasons why people love Elvis is that they know that he got really nervous before he went on stage. And you think to yourself, how could Elvis Presley get nervous? This kid owned rock and roll. He's the king of rock and roll, right? He said that he would get so nervous that he would forget the lyrics to the first song. He said to mumble through some of it sometimes just to kind of get on track. And then once he kind of starts feeling the moment and he gets that sort of out-of-body experience on stage, he gets that whatever he needs to perform. Feeling, and everything comes back to him. We know that people that are fortunate and blessed who still give, they're the most famous people. I think that Brad Pitt is one guy that, a very handsome guy, pretty darn good actor, right? He's getting better with everything he ever does, typically. He doesn't get the best roles all the time. But he's always been a nice guy that wants to give, right? Harry Connick Jr. is another guy. I think Keanu Reeves is one of those guys. We like the humble ones. We like the ones that have enough confidence to make us, to entertain us, to help us. We don't like the ego part of things, right? I worry about these truther shows where it becomes a me show. I do the show and I don't introduce myself at all. And I just don't want to. I just don't feel, it's not out of anything out to protect myself. I could care less. You could go to the website and find out who we are, whatever. But it just seems like the wrong tense of why am I here? Am I here to, if I want to make a show about myself, geez, or pump up a brand or something, it just seems nuts, right? We think of Coast to Coast AM as a show, and we know that George Norrie, who's now running the show, he's the guy who hosts it. They do say his name. There are certain FCC laws about station identifications, and I don't know if you have to identify who you are, but they do want you, as a matter of law, to say where the signal's coming from, right? Which show are you? It's like every 15 minutes you're supposed to station identification who you are. But I worry about the Alex Jones show. It's not that I have anything against him whatsoever, or think he's doing a bad job. I just think that it just seems odd to come to that. I put my face on the graphic, right? Because I just need some icon. And if I create a symbol or something, everyone's going to think I'm worshiping Satan or something, right? So my face is, a unique thing. So that's what I do. I keep the sunglasses on to keep it interesting. I make it black and white to make it easy to see in YouTube, right? Because if everything is color, then you're having to sift through color in your mind. Is this the Deep Thoughts color show? No, if it's all black and white. I made that choice really early so that you could just go, you can even be talking to a friend, just say, go search on Deep Thoughts, scroll down to see a dude in sunglasses, and he's black and white. And you're going to see Deep Thoughts on there. That's the dude. Click on that. It makes it easy for you. But the thing is I'm talking about ego, and I guess if I talk about something that could be wrong in the world, I typically talk about it from the standpoint that I've experienced it myself. And that's, maybe your experience, like alcoholism, for instance, right? I've never been an alcoholic, but I talked a whole show about dealing with alcoholics in case you happen to be in love with one or working with one or glued to one, and how to deal with it, how to see it, how to deal with it, etc., right? When it comes to ego, I don't know, do I accuse one of you of having an ego? Do I say, okay, well, if you have an ego, this is what you can do? I don't think someone with an ego would get this far in the episode, which is kind of cool, actually. Sort of, I have an animal messing around in my tree. It's like he's dropping pineapples out of the tree. But one of the things I've talked about on the show in the past is a level of, a method of which to deal with certain things that are unpleasant, right? The ego, like you could hate someone with an ego, like this guy I talked about at EA. It's hard to like that guy. If you need a patience system to understand someone with an ego, maybe that's where the value of this conversation really is, which is essentially, it's a weakness in them. What's the reason why I'm saying this is that I've seen lead singers who the public thinks are a bunch of arrogant jerk-offs, right? And then you meet them behind the scenes, and you realize their utter frailty. They are literally sweating, and they are taking drugs to calm down because they are so freaking nervous about failing. The confidence and hubris that you think they have is actually the complete opposite, which is why they're not on stage. They're not breaking up the band because they want to break up the band. They're breaking up the band because they don't want to get caught not having that talent anymore. It's like getting old. You have porcelain skin for a little while, and then all of a sudden you get more wrinkles, right? All right. Well, what if you didn't think you should have wrinkles your whole life? And so you're getting all this plastic surgery and stuff, so you always look good in front of people in your own mind, right? Now, sometimes ego can be a caricature game that a person plays. I definitely have been guilty, and I know Kyle's really good at it, right? He and I are both aware of how to exude sort of a fake ego, right? A fake almost like satire confidence about whatever we're doing at a particular moment in time, right? And, Kyle and I are, we're definitely extremely confident in what we can do, but at the same time, we're normal guys, right? We're frail in our ways, and we're confident in other ways. And even if you're confident, because we're always pushing the envelope in what we've done from the past, and we push it to new barriers that we've never done ourselves, that we create jokes, we fake it, that we actually have this ego. And that's kind of funny, I think, to people, because they know we don't have it once they get together, But the one thing that's real interesting is, like, I think that the breakup of Journey was very interesting. I had nothing to do with these guys, and I'm glad they have that new lead singer. He's amazing. But you had Steve Perry, who was starting to get ill. And it seems as if he was ill with something. Once you watch the documentary where they found the new lead singer, it seems like he had caught something that was almost going to kill him, and then he survived, and then he didn't come back to the band. He went off to Hawaii to, he was at Diamond Head, hiking around to get ready for his tour to build up his stamina, and he had a complete breakdown and almost supposedly died up on this hill or something. They came and got him out of there and saved his life. But looking back, I'm not quite sure it was real. I think maybe he was going through a midlife crisis about, I guess the rumor is that he sang from the throat instead of from the nasal canal. When you sing from the throat, and you can see it in his throat when he sings, you rip the crap out of your vocal cords. They eventually lose their elasticity, and you can't make the notes like you used to, which is why they always teach you how to sing through your nose, right? And then sing from your abdomen, your diaphragm, and project and that kind of stuff. And it's a technique to make sure you can sing for the rest of your life. But I think he was feeling like he couldn't sing anymore. And, the big rumor went around that he blew out his voice. And there's a couple lead singers that I've seen on video blow out their voice. And I think there's even one of the replacement singers for Rat. I forget the guy's name. I think I know his name, but I don't want to say it in case I get it wrong. But the guy who was on stage, I think you can search on RATT, lead singer blows out his voice or something like that, and you'll see this video of him up there, and he's singing, and he's even in a documentary. Maybe it wasn't Rat, but it's probably happened more than once. But these guys blow out their voices. But the weird thing about Stephen Perry, Perry, there's Piercy and Perry, two different bands, right? As soon as he decided he didn't want to sing anymore, for whatever reason, he told his bandmates, I don't want you to take the band out at all. It's, without me, it's not Journey, in his mind, right? Now think about that. Think about whatever you do for a living, and there's some other guy sitting next to you, or girl, and they happen to work in the same department as you, and they're just as important as you are, right? Maybe they're the more customer-facing person, whatever you're doing, but they decide to retire. And they come back to the office and they say, I don't think any of you should be able to work, earn a paycheck, enjoy life, engage your purpose in life, because I don't want to do it myself. And I think that Stephen Perry, quite frankly, had the biggest ego. I think he's probably lost this by now, but I think he's had the biggest ego in the music industry that I've ever personally heard. Now, it doesn't mean I have all the drop and all the examples of this, but to come back to your band and say, I don't think you should earn any money. Just take your royalties and go. And believe me, they got decent royalty checks. But it's horrendously arrogant to say, and ego-driven to say, that I get to control all of your lives. And of course, they did the right thing and they kept touring. And Stephen was very critical of them for continuing to tour. Just crazy. But part of it was all about, if I can't have it, you can't have it either. That kiddie thing that you have on your little kid. You don't want to share your toy. Then you have the ego that is very destructive. The one that thinks it can do a lot more than it can. And there's a million examples of this, right? There's a lot of dramas on TV that live off this theme of ego, which is great because then we get to see someone fictitiously fail, right? I remember, and it could be like, overconfidence is sort of what feeds. As soon as you get confidence over the level that I think that is healthy for you, whatever sips over that line becomes ego. And ego is the margin over that you need to have. Now, you could say that, if you've never gone on stage, let's say you're a singer, right? And you sing in your house, you sing in a studio, you maybe even recorded the next top 10 album, but you've never been on stage before. You've never toured before. And so now it's your first time. You got to go out and do this, right? Well, you're going to have to tell yourself something. You should just have the confidence that you can pull it off. Just because people are watching you doesn't take away the ability to do what you do, But you may need to play some games with your mind to make sure that you can pull this off. I don't think that's what we're talking about here. I remember one time when I was learning how to drive a motorcycle. I already knew how to drive a motorcycle, but I had to get a license eventually, and so I was taking all these classes in school. And they provided these motorcycles for us, and we had a big college in my little hometown, and so you could, they marked off the parking lots to have little lanes and stuff. It's where we learned how to drive cars, too. And so we're all driving in this big loop with our motorcycles. And one of the kids had grown up in a machine shop, in a car repair shop. His father used to take care of, I think he still has it to this day, VW Bugs. And he's driving like a bat out of hell in this parking lot. And he's a big kid. He's like fat. But he's also huge. He's probably got the biggest bones on planet Earth. He's like a part hominid, right? And he is overtaking kids. And he doesn't realize he doesn't really have any experience riding motorcycles. You could tell. I've been riding a motorcycle since I was 8. And I don't have a motorcycle now because too many of my friends have died riding them. So it's not an if, it's a when. And so I chose not to risk that in my life. Which I wish I didn't live in such a populated area, because if I lived in Arizona or something, I'd definitely get myself a bike. But he's leaning like crazy on the turns. And we're all looking at this guy. One, he's being obnoxious. And so we're only supposed to do so many laps and then park the bike, and another kid will take it. And because we have more kids than bikes. So I dropped my bike off after my however many loops I did, and I went over to the teacher. I said, that dude over there, so-and-so, is about to dump his bike. I said, he's just way overconfident with what he's doing, and you can just tell he doesn't know what he's doing, right? He's leaning like he's on some crotch rocket in some, bike race, right? Running an open pipe, right? And so no sooner that I said that, he does one of these turns. My teacher looks over at him. He's this wood shop teacher, man. He's this hard-ass dude, right? He looks over at the kid, and the kid overtakes 2 people on a turn. This is a parking lot. This is a tiny parking lot, right? And he immediately dumps the bike. Kaboom, right? And, of course, he weighs a ton, so he's not only dumping the bike with its velocity, but he's crushing it into the ground with his own body weight, right? Just destroys all the... this bike, now they have to go file an insurance claim on the bike because it's so screwed up. Bent all the pedals up, blew out all the, signal, units, light fixtures and stuff. Just fucking scuffed up the tank and ripped the seat, just screwed it completely up. And so, of course, he's embarrassed as hell. And the whole place stops, right? The whole place goes, whoosh. And he's got to pick up his bike, and he's got the walk of shame, bringing it back to his teacher. And... he's like, I don't know what happened, man. I don't know what happened. He's like, he literally doesn't know why the bike crashed. And my teacher just goes, well, these guys right here said you're about to crash your bike. And no sooner did they say that, did you dump your bike? And so obviously they understand why you dumped your bike, and you didn't let him ride anymore that day. I tell you that story because we've all experienced that, where we got overconfident. Our ego starts getting fed, which is an irrational motor in our brains, and then we fail. Now, I pray that all of you did that in the privacy of your own home, right? Where you did something and you screwed it up, and it was just, okay, let's not do that anymore, Sometimes it happens in public. Now, when you're embarrassed due to your ego, I find that it's interesting that one of 2 things occurs. You either deflate your ego, which we always talk about, or you go off and pump it up even higher to fuel the next moment, out of some insecurity that you're not going to be able to do it if you don't do that. Like you're going to not be able to do it again. Oh my God, if I can't let my confidence go down, so I got to pump up my ego. Now we know that there's 2 different things, right? Your confidence is what you're supposed to have as much of as possible based on what you're actually able to accomplish in the world. And your ego is sort of how you've bullshitted yourself that you can do more than you can do. If I said to myself making one of these shows that, boy, I'm so affecting the world, and everyone who watches my show comes away with more knowledge than they had before, I would be completely full of crap. Some of you know 50 times more than I know about any of this stuff. Maybe even this subject has a beautiful irony in it that I'm not really getting at the jugular, the best examples of what ego means to mankind, right? Or what it means to you, what it really is, right? So just know your narrator does not believe any of that particular thought process. I hope something triggers something in someone, right? I want you to have as much confidence as you can possibly have. I want you to have the skills to back up that confidence. And even if you don't have the skills, what I want you to have is the confidence that you can go get those skills. That you don't believe that there's special DNA that gets you there. You know, and again, if you want to be an NBA player, all right, yeah, you need to win the jackpot of being really tall and fit. But aside from those really rare cases, I think it was interesting when people want to be rock stars and they'll look in the mirror and for whatever reason they don't think they can. They think they're not attractive enough. They don't think they're perhaps even tall enough or something like that, right? And the amount of lead singers that we've had in the world that have been able to get on stage and make it happen, and they look completely odd. Once you look odd, what's interesting is you go with that oddness and you can take your odd look. This is anywhere in life, of course. You can take your odd look and clean it up really, really cool. And people will be jealous that you look unique. They'll be jealous that they look like a Ken doll and you look unique. Or that you look like a Barbie and they look like some eccentric person, I think that the only thing that doesn't really appeal to the masses is if you happen to put off a vibe of looking unkept and it's just what I've seen in the industry, right? You can be anything you are, but just keep yourself tight. And well, some people are, really overweight. For whatever reason, they show up with really tight, suits or clothing or whatever. They just groom themselves beautifully, and we're totally cool with that, right? So Oprah's gone up and down 200 pounds her whole life, up and down, up and down, up and down. No one stops watching her show because she ends up taking whatever she is at that point in time and makes herself look good, gorgeous. How many comedians did we have that were absolutely overweight? Now some of them die early. Was it John Candy? He left the world way too soon due to weight, and it's sad. But at least they gave us everything they had when they were here, right? John Belushi was never a Chippendales model, but no one will argue he's one of the funniest men that ever lived. Chris Farley, same way. I actually met Chris Farley's brother at the Improv on Melrose. I had a great conversation with him, and I swear to God, this is the brother that's almost a carbon copy of Chris. I mean, the two look exactly the same. It's wild. Same incredible smile, and I had a good conversation with him. And, for any of you who believe there's a conspiracy, against these guys, I talked to him about his bro, and he was like, yeah, he goes, we all knew it was just a matter of time because he just got more and more intense as time went on. And he's a great example. Chris Farley's a great example because we all believed he could do anything, which was probably a true perception of what he was able to do, but he never had an ego. And that insecurity got him. And he kept feeling like, Hollywood, you're always supposed to top your last accomplishment. I think in life we tend to buy into that sort of thing. It's not exactly true. Being consistent has a lot of value as well. And there's a perception you need to have a heartbeat. If you get out of play, coming back in is really, really tough. And I think Jim Carrey's figured that out. Jim Carrey's on top of the world making all the most incredible comedies on planet Earth for people who like that kind of comedy. And then he disappears for almost a decade or even half a decade, and then it's tough for him to get a role. It's tough for people to go, oh my God, it's a Jim Carrey movie. Let's go see it. And, then you age and you don't look like your previous character. So it's hard to go back and reprise the character. And then things like Dumb and Dumber 2 come out and you're like, oh man, has the guy lost his art? Most of the time, whatever critique we have of another celebrity, they have 10 times the critique on themselves. And that's why it's important that we're gentle with folks like that because, again, Robin Williams took himself out And there was probably, I total up every negative comment they've ever said about the guy on the internet, and it's probably nothing. So I'm not sure how much he ever saw anyone else disapprove of his performances, but for whatever reason, he disapproved of his own life, you know? So to close this up, I just want to say this, you know, obviously I don't have any magical answers about how to manage an ego. I think that for me, there's a fuzzy line, which is, can you live off of confidence 100%? I tend to think you can. I tend to think you can keep everything that you do inside a level of confidence. I think it's important to know that you will have, it's almost like, here's an analogy I think that might work for us, right? The speed limit in America on average is about 60 miles an hour. Okay. Well, we know in America they don't really write you a speeding ticket until you're about at least 10 miles over the speed limit. And I always wondered why that was the case. You know, some states in America are way more strict than that. But the reason why, I think they don't write tickets until you're 10 miles over the speed limit, is that they realize that you really can't convince a vehicle to stick at 60 miles per hour. And you can't just put it on cruise control in LA, right? There's no place in LA you can do cruise control unless you're coming home at 3 o'clock in the morning. And even that, you're going to have to be careful not hitting the cars in front of you that are going slower. So you're going to have to pedal this thing with an inferior human body. And they know that. And so they give you a reprieve. Okay, we know that if you're at least 10 miles an hour over, we got you. You're trying to speed. Now in LA, just so you know, they don't really nap you until you're 20 miles over the speed limit. They got crimes to fight in LA. But with the ego and the confidence, I want you to think of confidence as the speed limit. Whatever we're supposed to have, confidence-wise, in any one subject in your life, that's the speed limit maximum that we're supposed to have. And, you know, just like there's ordinance here in California where you're supposed to, you can literally get a ticket for merging into traffic. It doesn't usually happen that often, but if a cop's following you in LA and you join the highway at 45 miles per hour, he might pop his carousel and write you a ticket because you aren't following the, I forgot what it is, but it's the kind of moving codes, you know, whatever it is, the ordinances or what, not ordinance probably, but whatever the hell the law is that governs speed. There's a law that says you have to merge with traffic at the speed it's going. And I was even at traffic school 15 years ago, and the guy was telling me, he said it's illegal not to join even if everyone's speeding, because you become a potential, you know, threat to the rest of the traffic by coming in really slow. So here's the thing. What if we said to ourselves, speed limit is our full maximum implementation of our confidence, and anything over that is where we go into a potential violation of our ego. That everything over the speed limit is ego. Because we're human, we're going to always nip over that speed limit every once in a while. We always will. And maybe it's not bad to put a little bit of ego in there. And maybe ego is where we gain sort of a personality over our ability. Now, if you go on stage and you're a performer, for instance, maybe, let's just take Mick Jagger. He was a tremendous personality, right? There's a bunch of them, right? But let's just take him since he's fairly unique in his stage performance. But if he went up there with just enough confidence to perform, if he didn't have a theatrical thing built up in his mind of what he does on stage, what his stage performance is, he may have just sat in front of the microphone and sang beautifully, perfectly, every single time until the day he passes away at a very late age, right? But perhaps him engaging over that speed limit gave him the ability to do the chicken walk, to do all the crazy stuff he does. And maybe all he ever does is engages the speed limit just like we drive cars. I don't have to speed in residential necessarily, right? I don't have to speed anywhere in life unless maybe the highway's open and I can pull that off safely. Well, maybe these performers go on stage and all they do within the art of what they do, they engage the ego a little bit to have some fun. They create that kind of syrupy personality over their normal personality. When they come off stage, they're obviously he's not walking like a chicken when he comes off the stage. When he's got to deal with being sick, he doesn't act like that. When he has to manage his children, he doesn't act like that. Romance a spouse or a girlfriend or whatever, he doesn't have to do that. Or maybe they do like a little bit of that, and dad's kind of crazy. Maybe that is where the ego can exist in sort of a small reservoir within our systems without causing us any issues. If I thought about making, I'll just tell you guys ahead of time, I thought about making a really cool intro for this, sort of like an old 70s TV series, like a Starsky and Hutch, right? Some sort of intro for maybe even Kyle and I both, where we do the old, looking around, we do snap pans or something, whip pans on us, or some sort of, like the Saturday Night Live intro where all the actors pretend to be happy somewhere in New York, But, we could do our little tough poses and then freeze frame and then blow our names at the bottom. Now, there's two reasons why we haven't done that. One, again, it starts to promote our brand over our information. Now, maybe people would like that. For me, it just gives me the willies. I know talking with Kyle, he won't let me videotape him because he just doesn't want that level of exposure, that level of ego. But now if he had an ego... And he's a rock star. He's really a rock star. He's a 2-time Emmy-winning special effects guy. So he's been in these privileged areas to be rewarded for what he's done in really huge ways, right? But even in all those accolades, well, I think because of those accolades, he and I both find ways to feel rewarded for what we do outside of somehow kind of extorting it out of you guys or throwing it in your face, right? So half the reason to make this episode is because I've made so many of these episodes. I want to make sure that we address, so I can check myself with you guys verbally, just so that you understand. Again, I'm not doing these episodes and coming away thinking, oh my God, I killed it. Every once in a while, I'll feel that way about an episode, and then it kind of erodes very quickly. But the times that I've created what I think are the worst episodes ever, I'll put them online, and people are like, that's my favorite episode. This changed my life. And I'm like, wow. And sometimes I listen to the episodes and I'm like, who's this guy talking? I can record an episode and then 3 days later proof it back. So I, hear it. I got to edit the whole thing, and I'll say something like, well, I got a story for you about this one thing. And I'm sitting at my desk going, what did I say? I can't remember what I said. So sometimes this whole thing is sort of an out of body experience. Like, the comedian Louis Anderson, I think I saw him in the documentary on Netflix about Richard Pryor. He gave a little, he might have been Robin Williams as well, but he said that, the first time he ever went on stage to do stand-up, he said he walked on stage, he was utterly horrified to be on stage, because he's a really heavy-set guy and he looks kind of goofy, which he played beautifully into his character. We love him for that uniqueness, like I said, And he said, I had an out-of-body experience. He goes, the whole time I'm doing my bit, which is, I think he had a 5-minute opening or 5-minute thing in his first microphone appearance. He said, I felt like I was floating above my body, watching my body do the entire stand-up. And then I walked off stage and he goes, I couldn't remember anything that I said, but he goes, everybody was laughing, so I felt good. That's cool, right? I would wish that on everyone, to have a really good time with whatever you do for a living, whatever you do for your pastimes, right? Again, I'm going to deviate from ego and then close this thing off, which is this. If we ever work together and I was your manager, it doesn't matter what job we're doing. I will come to you. I will learn your name. I will learn who you are. I will study you to see if you're happy, if you're overtly happy. And then we're going to have a one-on-one, probably at least once a week, if not once a month, depending on how big the department is. And I will drill into you the following. I've done this hundreds of times. I will ask you if you're happy. And I will ask you if, when you bounce out of bed in the morning, are you excited to come to work? If you say no to either one of those questions, then I'll ask you the following question. I'll say, well, when did you pop out of bed in the morning and you were utterly thrilled to be alive? When did that happen? And then I'll say, okay, if it's within my power to align you in this company with your tasks to match the inside of your being, who you are inside, which hopefully comes with confidence, then we're going to do everything in our power to pull this off. And I've actually had employees that told me they wanted to be in different departments especially within electronic arts. And I made good on all my promises. And one of the guys was one of my chief coders. But he wanted to get into coding that wasn't going to be useful in the department that I was in. And so I asked him, I made him a deal. And here's what I said to him. I said, look, I'm not sure how fast I can pull this off, but I will do everything in my power, my executive power, to get you to that other department with a referral, with warming up the other guy who runs that department, who's a friend of mine, and we'll get you there. And I said, just do me a favor in the meantime. Understand I'm on your side. I will do what I can to help you do what you love to do in this department, even though it's not what we really need from you. I'll greenlight some projects that are a little unorthodox to give you that opportunity. But do me a favor. For the next 6 months to a year, please give me everything you got for what we need here. My reward to you is that every second of every day between now and that moment where you get that promotion or get that change, I'll be cheering for you. And I was able to actually pull it off for this particular person within about 6 months. And so I made good on that. And he ended up living a life that really matched who he was as a person. And that's where I want every single one of you. With the ego, well, I'll put it this way. If you've never done what you love to do in your lifetime, you might be insecure about it. Don't be insecure. Just get as knowledgeable as possible. Realize that, only in very extremely rare cases do you need to have physical genetics to get what you need. And sometimes people are, they have those genetics, but they don't have the confidence they can pull it off. And that's the only difference between them getting what they want and not getting what they want. Sometimes you have to play games with your mind to get the confidence to try something you've never tried. And sometimes I think that the artificial stimulant to confidence is ego. Because I don't think you can manhandle confidence into your body. I think you can fake ego into your body. And it's almost as if, you always watch these sci-fi shows. There's usually a power supply to a spaceship, and then there's auxiliary power, right? It's always, so you map everything to get it from auxiliary power, put it into auxiliary power, right? I want you to think of the analogy as your own consciousness as having your ego as your auxiliary power. And what you're trying to do is fill it up. If you don't have enough core power to run your little spaceship of confidence, you want to take that from your auxiliary engine and fuel it into your confidence. I think also having a lack of worry about failing is a big one. I sang forever. I wrote songs and sang and blah, blah, blah. I got really good at singing. I'd put the headsets on and put the mic up, just one of these mics as a matter of fact, and I'd sing and I'd record it and I'd play it back and I'd listen to it like, am I on tune? Am I not on tune? I sound like I'm really on tune. God, I really can sing. But I had no means of really getting out and joining a band, or I just didn't have the time to do it. And then eventually, some of you are going to roll your eyes, but I was at a restaurant that did karaoke. And it was like a well-lit restaurant. It seemed kind of odd and inappropriate. And I usually find that really annoying to be trying to eat a meal, trying to talk to someone, and there's just this tone-deaf person singing. But then I was critiquing something that I hadn't done before. And so at one point, a guy gave me the mic. And I think I sang Knocking on Heaven's Door, Guns N' Roses style, And it's just a nice, easy song to sing. And I did really well, because I had been practicing for years ahead of time, but I had no confidence I could do this in a public forum at all, right? And so I started juicing it up. I started singing, harder and harder songs, right? At least pitch-wise and note-wise. Most people don't sing Robert Plant stuff very well. My voice naturally goes up to his level. I don't exactly sound like him, but I sing like myself, and I make a lot of his songs sound okay. We'll get to the point where I built up my confidence. I took my, I don't know if it was necessarily ego, but it was definitely, let's try this out, whatever you would call that stuff. And I fed it into an experience that then turned out to be confidence in the end. And it really changed my perception of what I was capable of doing. Maybe I could go into a band and sing, right, if I had the time to do it. It's weird, right? It gave me an opportunity. It opened up a gate in my mind by playing with my own willingness to fail in front of other people, because actually the restaurant I sang in was just maybe it had like 5 or 6 people in it, so it's kind of a small place. but it gave me the sort of in I needed, When my kid played softball, she didn't have the confidence that she could hit the ball with the bat. She'd never done it before. And by God, it took about a year for her to hit that first ball. And man, when she nailed it, she's bigger than most of the other kids. And so when she hit the ball, it really went the distance. And she became a first-string batter. They just put her up right away. And people feared her because once she hit the ball, she had the confidence to put it in there. But she had to, I think, engage. I think we could say ego to get up there to have the chance of doing it, using previous successes in other areas to say, I do what I think I can do. I know you feel me. So the dog's starting to bark next door, so I'll start the outro here. Again, Esoteric, thanks for making it this far. mkultraradio.com for all the feeds. That's really where this is at. Facebook is our only place where we really kind of blog. Sorry, it's in the contraption. For those of you who are trying to contact us, I know a lot of you want to send us an email here and there, and you don't want to get into the face recognition system of Facebook. You can send us an email at youtube@mkultraradio.com. That comes straight to us. So I thought I'd put that out there. I keep forgetting to say that. So if you guys have any suggestions for episodes, you want to stay off the radar, you want to send us references, I'm definitely talking to a couple of you guys, Mike being one of them. But again, I got so many suggestions that are fantastic, but they're so good, I got to do research. So I'm going to actually have to take some notes on some of these. I'm probably going to have to tape to the tripod like a set of subjects to go through so I don't forget them when I cover CERN and that kind of stuff. So anyway, if you made it this far, thanks for listening. As always, I appreciate all your viewership. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. If you haven't liked, please like. Take care of yourself and somebody else, and I'll see you in the next episode. Over now.